Thank you for your curiosity. With us today is an extremely special pod for me. With us is a pioneer and legend of mixed martial arts. He's also a fourth-degree black belt and founding member of ATT. With us in the goddamn room is none other than Wade Rome. Wade, thank you so much for being here, brother.
Thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. So I start off the program with this question because I'm always curious as to the intricacies that make everybody kind of the beginning of their story. So in order to understand the present and catch the glimpses into the future, we kind of have to visit the past a little bit. So what were you like as a child?
Little, immature, needy. I mean, all the things that kids are. I guess from a personality standpoint, I don't really know how to answer that question. I think I was, believe it or not, I was picked on as a kid. So I was bigger than most of the other people in my class, but I sort of was ganged up on. I didn't really fit in any sort of box, and I had to learn to stick up for myself, and that I think shaped a lot of who I am today.
Wow, I'm surprised because it's like you said, I would have imagined you would have been you would have towered over a few of your classmates, but it's not always the size of the dog in the fight, but the size of the fight in the dog. And most people, they'll think that the bigger person. I was like, I don't think so. That might have been the other way around in that sense. I'm surprised because from my research, you were state wrestling champion. You were even rewarded the wrestler of the year. Do you think that your wrestling pedigree kind of helped to shape you in some way?
Yeah, wrestling does one of two things: it destroys you, or it forms you and molds you into something stronger. Especially I had a phenomenal high school coach who was a really big influence on my life. To this day, has much of what he taught me and much of what he said to me, like, I carry through every day. If something's tough, I just think of things that he said to me in the past and just do it. I think wrestling. One of my cousins was a state placer in Tennessee, and he was sort of like my childhood hero. And I always wanted to be like him. And when he started wrestling and did well, I was like, oh, I'm going to wrestle as well. And, I was a runner up as a sophomore, which came out of nowhere. My whole goal was to make it to the state tournament. But, sometimes what's weird is when you've sort of accomplished your goal and you have nothing left to lose and you just let it go, things just happen. As a sophomore in the state tournament, I had the number one seed. I think it was first round in the state. He was undefeated. Everybody was telling me how great this guy was and whatever else. And I was thinking to myself, I've already accomplished my goal. I made it to the state tournament. I don't really care what happens. And I ended up beating him pretty bad. I think I tech falled, if I remember correctly. It was really close to a tech fall. People were like, what was that? And I was just like, I looked at my coach and I was like, I could win this. And he was like, I think you could, so I made it to the finals as a sophomore. I had a lead late in the match. I did not understand, was my own responsibility. I did not understand that we didn't need a pin to win the state championship as a team. So I really pushed hard to get the team, the pin. And the last 20 seconds, I ended up getting rolled onto my back from a position that I could have just coasted out. I had a 3-2 lead, and I ended up losing 7-2. And, it was, I ended up losing 7-3. I had a 3-2 lead, and I ended up losing 7-3 on a 5-point, 2-point reversal, 3-point back points. I ended the state championship match on my back, and I just remember thinking to myself, oh, my gosh, what are you going to do? But that shaped me, and then the next year after that, I obviously was a state champ. So that set a lot of things in, motion as far as believing in myself and knowing what I could and couldn't do. And I don't know, man. I think it was Dan Gable once said, after you've wrestled, everything else in life is easy. And it's honestly kind of true.
Yeah, I come from a wrestling household, and my brothers were tough, and everybody in my household wrestled. My nephew actually just went to States for New York. He lost, and then my other nephew, I think, won, I believe. I have to go double check that. But
won the state championship or he placed?
I think one placed and the other one I think lost. I know lost for sure. He didn't win first place.
In New York?
Mm-hmm.
New York has good high school wrestling, man. It's underrated.
Very much. And I think that this generation of wrestlers from New York it's scary to watch them because I've seen them kind of pull off some of those college moves where it's like the technique is a bit too clean, and I'm like, when did you start wrestling? And the guy will be like, I was 5, and I'm like, oh no, oh dear God, I'm terrified. But they're
I had a
phenomenal.
lot of that same thing. I didn't wrestle as a kid. I started wrestling in high school. I kind of played with wrestling when I was like, a little bit younger than that, because again, my cousin was a, successful wrestler in the state of Tennessee. But I had no real knowledge of wrestling. A friend of mine kind of took me. He's my best friend to this day. He was a senior when I was a freshman. He took me under his wing, and I mean they made things hard for me, but it shaped who I am and shaped who I was. And yeah, I think wrestling, like I said, either shapes you or destroys you. One of the two. There's no in between.
I agree. I think I've seen that a lot. And wrestlers, especially all the wrestlers that I'm still friends with who used to wrestle then and wrestled in college, all those guys are tough. Like every time we talked about a certain technique, they'd be like, yeah, go ahead, wrench that on. And I'm like, that might hurt a little bit. And they're like, so what? Let's see what it feels like. I
I think
mean,
what's interesting too is if you really look at it, like wrestlers are usually pretty successful in life. You know, I lived with a household full of wrestlers after my freshman year. We were required to live in the dorms. After that, I lived with a household full of wrestlers, and out of those guys, like it's a nuclear engineer, a surgeon, a judge, um, a guy who took over his parents' business and grew it from like 12 locations to like 80, and sold it. CarX was the name of the company. Um, so I mean, all those guys were wrestlers, and they were all successful, and it was I don't know. I think almost everybody I wrestled with in college has ended up being pretty successful in life. I think it's a work ethic thing. I think it's a grind thing. I think it's just willing to get up and do what other people aren't willing to do. Um, it'll set a mold in you for sure. It'll destroy you or push you to be somebody better.
absolutely. I agree
I
with
think
that.
jujitsu carries the same way, man.
It does, and I think now that a lot of the jiu-jitsu players are incorporating more wrestling, we're seeing guys kind of grind out rounds now that like before they would kind of just lay there and try to figure out how to get underneath them and get around them and get on their back. But now we're seeing guys shoot takedowns, like heavy takedowns, even push guys off the mat like aggressively. We're watching ADCC the other day in my house. We were just like, oh, let's go watch one of those old ADCCs just to kind of see what it was like. I was like, this is impressive, but as it starts to get like closer to the current era, you're starting to see more and more wrestling. You're starting to see more aggressive takedowns. You're starting to see more aggressive passes. You're starting to see guys like trying to smash each other. They're not even just trying to just get the position and then go for the submission. I think Gordon Ryan is one of those guys that like he's not a great wrestler, but what he does with his wrestling, I have to say it, it's extremely productive and effective. And I can see that other guys just get tired, just don't want to keep doing that.
He's just so efficient. The one thing Gordon doesn't get enough credit for is how efficient in his movement he is. He is extremely efficient in his movement. He's deliberate in the things that he does. And when you watch him, you realize that everything that he does is purposeful. Every single thing that he does is purposeful. There's not a wasted motion in anything that he does. And yeah, you're seeing a really big mix of like guys wrestling up. You'll see guys pull guard only to use it to wrestle up to a position and get a takedown. I was at a Zapatero event last night. I had one of my students compete, and it was like $100,000 qualifier, and the 8-man bracket. I believe it was 8, could have been 12. I think it was an 8-man bracket. Could have even been 16. And I don't remember how many people were there. There's a lot of really good matches. The level just at that local event. I mean, there was a ADCC East Coast silver medalist, trials silver medalist. He took 4th in the tournament. That's how tough that tournament was. It was like, shout out to Josh Ledoux and Zapatero because they put on a hell of an event last night. But the one thing that cued me on that is what you said is like the wrestle heaviness. There was so much wrestling in that event last night. It was like, wow, okay, the complexion of jiu-jitsu is changing.
I completely agree. I'm seeing it every year.
I think it's that, I mean, this might be a little bit controversial to say, but I think it's that American jiu-jitsu versus Brazilian jiu-jitsu. It's a little bit more of the wrestling influence is taking over in much of jiu-jitsu. And not that the Brazilians have not had a huge impact on jiu-jitsu, but I think, as with almost everything in life, it's become Americanized a little bit, and that wrestle heavy component of it is becoming a bigger and bigger part of it. I see it at my academy. I see it in the competitions. I see it in the up and comers. I see it in the people who are seeking out jiu-jitsu. I mean, there's a big component of wrestling that is getting added to jiu-jitsu for sure.
Yeah, and we're seeing it with the guys at the top especially, and it's incredible because I think there was even a commentator saying it. I think he said, I think 3 or 4 years ago, you would never see these guys go and shoot these type of takedowns. They'd be too afraid from the guillotine. They'd be too afraid about leaving their leg exposed if they overdid it. And now they don't give a damn. They're just going balls to the wall. Even Marigali's got like really good judo sweeps, and then he wrestles into them. And we never thought we were going to see guys like that start to compete in jiu-jitsu, which I always thought was really awesome to watch. But I think, like you said, I think it's the American jiu-jitsu kind of seeping into the sport and just that Americanized wrestling. Wrestling is tough. And that's, I think, what's really made a lot of these guys so good is like that. There's a level of toughness you kind of have when you wrestle. It's not longer just going to be just a flow motion. It's going to be like, I'm going to crash through you or you're going to crash through me, but somebody's going to break first. And then we're going to see where it goes. But I did want to talk to you because you have one of the most amazing lineages. I went back and did the research, and I almost had like a stroke trying to figure out how this worked. But can you break down your BJJ lineage? Because it's phenomenal.
Sure. So when I first started training jiu-jitsu, I really was not interested. I had gone around and I had tried like Aikido and Hapkido and Taekwondo and karate and Krav Maga. And honest to God, man, it was all bullshit. I was like, man, I literally would, I was kind of a mid-level executive at the time. So I would pay these guys $100 or $200 just, hey, stay after class. Let's like do a private. And I literally would just go live with these guys and I would take them down and the fight was over. And I was like, man, what I became convinced of was that wrestling was a martial art. I was like, honestly, wrestling is a martial art because if I could take these guys down and put them on the ground, man, like the whole complexion of the fight changed, and as a D1 wrestler, coming out of the Big Ten, it was like, I'm going to take you down and I'm going to hold you down if I want to. A friend of mine named Alex Davis, I don't even remember how we met, but Alex Davis, if you watch the UFC, most of the time, the guy that is in the ring doing the English to Portuguese and Portuguese to English translations is Alex. He also manages a ton of fighters. He was begging me to come and try jiu-jitsu. And finally, one day I was like, hey, man, if I go try jiu-jitsu, will you shut the hell up? Like, will you shut up? And he was like, yeah. So I walked into the gym one day and I met this guy named Alvaro Loyal. He was maybe like 5'10", 180. I'm like 6'1" and 3/4, almost 6'2", like 250. And nicest guy in the world. And I was like, okay, well, how does jiu-jitsu work? And he's like, well, where do you want to start? And, you want to start on the feet? I know you're a wrestler. And I was like, yeah. And anyway, the long and short of it is I took him down and the next thing I know, they're waking me up. And I was like, you know how it is when you first get put unconscious. If you've been put unconscious, you sort of confused when you wake up. And I was like, what happened? And he's like, oh man, you hit a great takedown, but I catch what we call a guillotine on you and you don't tap. And, man, you have to tap. Like, let me know, I'll let go and, whatever. And I was like, I didn't feel like there was the pressure there to tap. I felt that kind of pressure before with wrestling, but it's a different application, So we went again and I ended up unconscious again, like, a couple minutes later. And he was like getting increasingly aggravated with me. And, you have to tap. And I was like, man, I don't even know what happened. He's like, oh, you had a beautiful takedown, but I caught a triangle. And when I caught the triangle, like, you try to pass and you passed out. And I was like, okay, man, so he's like, look, you have to tap. All you have to do is just, let me know, like, hey, stop, tap with your hands, tap with your voice, whatever you want to do. It's like, you want to go one more time? And I was like, yeah. So I went again and I ended up unconscious again. And I woke up, he was screaming at me. And I'll never forget looking up at him. And I was like, but aren't I the one that got choked unconscious? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, why are you yelling at me? You know what I mean? And he was like, because you don't tap, you know? And I was like, honestly, man, like, mom didn't raise no bitch. I didn't feel like that was anything. You know what I mean? Like, and he's like, no, you have to tap. It's not good. So he was like, listen, you want to train jiu-jitsu? You be here at 6:00 tonight. Otherwise, like, get the hell out of my gym. So I was there at 6:00 that night, man. And that's how I started jiu-jitsu. So that was under Alvaru. That was my friend Alex that got me involved. I don't remember exactly what happened, but Alvaru, I think, left the country or went back to Brazil, or he may have moved to Colorado. Somebody told me he may have moved to Colorado, but the academy closed. I started training with Rodrigo Nogueira, and I got my purple belt from Rodrigo Nogueira, but we were kind of trading. Like, he was teaching me jiu-jitsu. I was teaching him wrestling. He was, believe it or not, he was mostly a gi guy. So, in fact, he was all gi. And when he told us he wanted to fight, we were all like, what? Like, he was the most improbable guy to fight in the world. And we were like, man, I don't know how good of an idea that is, but we obviously were very wrong. But I got my purple belt from him. I met Ricardo Libório in late 99, early 2000. I was training at a guy named Conan Silveira and Silveira brothers, the Silveira brothers. I was training with both of those guys. We decided we were going to form American Top Team, or Dan Lambert had a vision for American Top Team at that time. I obviously moved over, started training under Libório, and in 2005, I got my black belt under Ricardo Libório. So my story was sort of mixed, but it was not really something I made decisions on. It's things evolve, things change. You know, it was really sort of the same. I was really training with the same people the entire time, but just the evolution of, other than Alvaru, the evolution was that, you know, the gyms were consolidating or moving or changing or whatever. You know, the Silveira brothers were both actively involved in American Top Team. So when I started training with Libório, it was more of an evolution from Silveira brothers to American Top Team than it was switching teams or anything.
Wow. I'm sorry. The way you kind of like did that was a little too cool. I'm sorry. You name dropped, but in my mind, I was like, that's so cool. I would have probably just like maybe had a stroke. But that's me. I'm one of those fanboys that, like, I've watched the sport since I was a kid, and like I love this fucking sport. So I lose my mind every time I hear about these guys coming in from back in the day, and we're like, well, nobody thought he was gonna win, and then you're like, the guy that was the world champion was not. Really? No one saw it?
No, man, no. Like, it's not that he wasn't good. He was just a gi guy, and it was like, okay, you want to fight, you know? But I tell you, man, his improvement and his ability and his work ethic were crazy, you know? He's a frustrating guy, because he would tell you, you know, all right, I'll be there at 3:00 in the afternoon, and, you know, come 8 p.m. at night, he would show up. You know, he was one of those guys. But when he was there, the guy trained like an animal. It was insane. You know, I remember him popping his ankle one time, and he just took some duct tape and wrapped his ankle up and kept training. And afterwards, when he took it off, I couldn't believe what his ankle looked like. It looked like a balloon, you know, but the guy never stopped training. You never knew it. He was just mentally one of the toughest guys I ever met in my life. And we remain friends to this day. I talk to him often on Instagram. You know, there's a lot of guys that I've trained with over the years or came up with over the years. You know, Libório's in Orlando. I see him often. I don't talk to Dan as much as I'd like to, but I still occasionally see him on places, or we'll correspond by text. You know, the complexion of communication has changed dramatically over the years. You know, it's like, why would you call me? You could just text me. And so most of the interaction with people these days is over text message. But funny story about when I met Libório. He came into Boca Black Belt Academy, which was where Marcelo's academy was at. And that academy on Saturdays and Sundays was insane. I mean, the room was Wilson Gouveia, Rodrigo Nogueira, Rogerio Nogueira, Frank Mir, Thiago Alves, Jeff Monson, Marcus Aurelio, Edson Denise, Pablo Popovich, Man, I know I'm missing some really good guys. Leo Itaborhe, Conan, Tom Sauer would come and train with us. I mean, the room was insane. The room was off the charts. Margarita would come. We'd always have Brazilians coming in. Margarita was there training with us. It was insane, man. That room was, and there was probably 200 square feet of mat, 300 square feet of mat, and there was no room. Like, you were literally grappling against somebody right next to somebody else who was grappling against somebody. But none of us gave a shit. It was just, you showed up. It'd be 95 degrees out, and we'd smoke the windows and the room. You know what I mean? It was crazy. And all the plants out in back of this place, because the entrance was on the rear side of it, and they had planted a bunch of plants back there. All the plants were dead from everybody puking in them. It was insane, man. And then the shower outside was a hose, like stuck through 2 wooden slats that just hung there, and bunch of naked or half naked or mostly naked guys out there showering after class after they puked. I mean, it was insane back then, man. I honestly don't know how we survived it, but it definitely made us into who we were.
Yeah, man. I mean, everyone you just name dropped also had me like, oh my God, it's like Murderer's Row, and you're just walking in like, all right, let's see how this goes. This is a great time.
I know I've not mentioned, and it's just trying to remember all the people that were in that room at one time was insane. I mean, the talent level in that room was really, really good. And honestly, there was not the smorgasbord of BJJ schools to choose from. The Silveira brothers were early pioneers. I remember training with a guy one day, and I was like, wow, like, that guy's surprisingly tough. Like, who is he? It was David Lee Roth. Like crazy, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, wow, wait, the guy from Van Halen? Like, yeah, that's David Lee Roth. I was like, wow, okay.
Dude.
Like, it was crazy. You never know who was going to show up. You never know who was training there. I trained with the Avalon brothers back then, and they would come and visit at the academy. And South Florida was a mecca of jiu-jitsu and became a mecca of MMA thanks to Dan Lambert and, American Top Team and their leadership. There were a lot of really strong, good, skilled people, and there. Pablo and his father opened an academy, and they had a ton of killers over there. I mean, South Florida was crazy, and there was even though there was the attitude of not cross training, there wasn't that attitude in South Florida. We all trained at each other's academy. Tuesdays was this academy, Wednesdays was this academy, Fridays was this academy. I don't remember if it was Saturday or Sundays was the Silveira brothers, but it was one of the Silveira brothers academies, and everybody showed up, man, and it was nuts.
That sounds like a great time to go back in that time and just see what those rooms were like. Those rooms had to be insane, and it had to be phenomenal, because to cross train like that and have this variety of bodies and variety of styles, you guys must have just been improving like every single day that you guys trained like this. It just must have been a weird, like, a progression. I don't think did you guys even know, like, damn, we're getting really good really fast?
No, definitely not. A lot of us were winning, and I think I was a purple belt the first time I won the Arnolds, and I beat a couple black belts and whatever, but it never even occurred to me. It was like, man, I never looked across the mat and thought, okay, well, I'm nervous because, man, everybody I had in the room at home, I was like, whatever, like, you're not going to scare me. I got 3 of those tigers in a cage at home, like, and I think coming from D1 wrestling too, like, whatever, you know what I mean? Like, I'll never forget wrestling in college, and, like the first week or two in the room, it was just like the level and D1 wrestling is a level itself, but then you go to the Big Ten and it's another level of wrestling. And I'll never forget, like, a really influential guy on me when I was young was a guy named Matt Berger. He was a upperclassman at Illinois when I first got there, and for some reason he took me under his wing. I think mostly to abuse me, but we were actually, he was good to me. But Matt, I don't remember something. I'd said something after practice one day or whatever, and he looked at me and he's like, "Hey, man, everybody in this room was fucking good in high school, right? Like everybody in this room was good in high school. Nobody gives a shit. It's a reset. Nobody cares how good you were in high school. Nobody cares how good you were. Like one of my college roommates, John Llewellyn, was third, and first in the NCAAs. He never placed in the state. He was like 55-1 his senior year, like lost his first match at state tournament and didn't place. He never placed, and yet he was third, and first in the NCAAs at heavyweight. Beat Kurt Angle his senior year, lost to Carlton Hasselrig. Like, the guy was amazing. He's passed away recently, but he was a phenomenal wrestler. And, like, he was never a state placer in high school. He was never a guy that had a lot of success, but doesn't mean that he wasn't successful at the collegiate level. Like, it's crazy, man. Like, everybody was good at high school, whether you knew it or not. Everybody there was good at one point.
That's phenomenal. I think that's great advice for these up and coming fighters who, are starting to figure out, hey, well, I was really good at when I did this one sport, and then now that I'm in MMA, it's completely different. Definitely gonna have to take that into account. Even myself, I was like, wow, that makes a lot of sense, because I was a pretty decent boxer, but the minute I got taken down, I would just get frustrated with myself. And now I'm at that place where, like, I love jiu-jitsu and I'm so immersed in it. But you were one of the founding members of ATT. What was it like when you guys first created that team, and then who came up with the name American Top Team?
So there was Brazilian Top Team, which is where Ricardo came from, Libório came from. I don't really know the onus. I don't know that it was ever really discussed. I know that Libório wanted to come to the United States. I know that he wanted to sort of replicate what they had done with Brazilian Top Team. I know he had the blessings of his partners, at least as I understand it, with Brazilian Top Team. And a lot of those guys came up and trained with us, so there had to be, like, good rapport. Dan was in a position, he was training a lot financially. He was in a position to sort of help get things started. And honestly, the primary visionary from day one has been Dan Lambert, always has been. He's sort of always been ahead of the curve just in the way that he looked at things. I don't know if you know it or not, but myself and Dan and Jim and a few guys that back in the day used to put on all the WEF events. And we were bigger than UFC. All the UFC stars actually came through the WEF first. And one of our matchmakers, a guy named Jamie Levine, who again passed away, years ago. He was honestly a visionary just in MMA. Like, his thought process, his implementation side was not so great, but his thought process and his prospecting for talent and picking up and noticing talent all over the United States. I mean, I think to go back to my statement, Dan was just a visionary in a lot of ways. He was a visionary in MMA. He was a visionary in jiu-jitsu and informing, like, teams to sort of do, like, he sort of saw the big picture ahead of everybody else. And we all just sort of fell in behind his guidance and did what we needed to do to make the team better. And we had a lot of talent coming, and we had a lot of talent coming from Brazil and all over the United States to train with us. And I mean, as far as I know, we were the first, like, dedicated academy that just did MMA and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I know I found the location for our first facility, and it was not very far from my house, but that just happened to be the way it ended up working out. It was like 18,000 square feet or so. I mean, that was our first, like, real facility outside of where we had 200 or 300 square feet of mats. So that was a huge, upcycle for us. And a lot of the guys, when they came over there to train, I mean, you'd walk on the mats on a Saturday for a high belt roll or whatever, and there'd be 20 black belts, 15 brown belts, like 30 purple belts. The depth of the room was crazy. So, to answer your question, it was bleeding edge. There's a difference between cutting edge and bleeding edge. Like, cutting edge, you're sort of on the forefront of what's happening, but you're sort of in the mix from a revenue standpoint. We were in the bleeding edge. I mean, we were losing money on the academy. We were losing money on the WEF, but we tried to acquire the UFC at one point. We actually put up the money and tried to acquire the UFC. In fact, there was the UFC that was a half. It was like the last UFC ever put on by the original guys that founded it. And Dan and our group put up the money for that. And it just didn't end up working out. But, sometimes things are for the better because Dana and the Zuffa brother, the Zuffa organization, I mean, they put $50 million into it before they ever made a dime, for Tita Brothers. So, it ended up the way it should have. But I don't know. I feel like I'm all over the place with my answer here.
No, but you know what? For the guys like me and the guys that listen to the pod, we're so intrigued by like these early days and like what was happening. And it's great to have you here because I can at least pick your brain and we can get to talk about these things that I know that a lot of fans who watch the pod especially, they're so curious. They're like, man, what were these guys thinking about? There was no money in this game. There was nothing but love. You had to have love it. I don't think there's anything else to it at that time. It was purely based on love, and we saw this thing, and we knew what it could be, but no one else could really see it, and that's what we really want to know. So I appreciate your answer, man. It's wonderful. It has those early roots of ATT. ATT is the first MMA super team. I think after you guys it was Lions Den, but that was like a few years later. And then after that, I think it just started to like people started realizing if we can culminate all the things we need in one place so that all these guys can come fight and come train with us, then it's going to make it better. But I think you guys were the originals in that perspective. But you actually,
I think Lions Den might have preceded us from a name and presence standpoint, but and no knock on those guys. I just don't know that they had the vision or the financial ability to execute, which we were blessed with, because of Dan and some of the other people that were involved. But they may have preceded us slightly as far as name, but yeah, I think you're right. American Top Team was the first super team and still is a super team. I mean, if you look at the depth of talent in American Top Team now, it's only gotten bigger and better. And I think one thing that you'll notice too is the loyalty. There definitely have been a lot of talented guys that have left American Top Team, but as a percentage, the amount of people that have actually stayed with American Top Team is pretty high. It's especially compared to the amount of turnover to other academies and other teams.
Yeah, we definitely saw that. I mean, last night's event, 299, which was wonderful. I had a blast on my birthday watching that. And Joanna Jędrzejczyk is in the Hall of Fame. Dustin Poirier takes on Saint Denis and knocks him out cold. I mean, viciously. And
you can never count Dustin out of a fight. Never.
You can, to a point that I was watching the fight and I was rooting for Dustin, but Saint Denis started to try to get a little too close, and I was like, don't exchange with Dustin. Everybody does this. They think that they have him on the ropes, and they go right after him, and then all of a sudden, he hits you and you don't know what the hell touched you, but you know that a grenade went off. And then you're waking up and you're like, what happened? He hit you. That's exactly what happens every fight that Dustin has. They get into a firefight, and we know exactly what's coming. He's going to hit you, and you're going to go down. He hits like a train. There's just nothing.
He also has an ability to like pattern movements. He's really good at sort of probing his opponents, figuring out what their reactions are, and then getting away from that and then going back to the well later. So he doesn't even sort of, you can watch it, when you reverse engineer the fights, you can see it happen. But he's not even a guy that probes and then attacks right away. He'll probe, figure out what you're going to do, figure out what your reactions are, and then go back to them later in the fight when you're not expecting it. You know what I mean? It's not like he's probing it and he's working into a solution then. He's predicting the solution based upon your reactions, and then he'll let that go. You'll notice he'll stop doing things for a little while in the fight. You're like, wait, that low kick was really successful. Why isn't he going back to it? Then he will go back to it later on, and it will set up one of his ability to finish. It's he's really, really talented, and he's been around it long enough that he knows exactly what he's doing.
Yeah. Like I said, again, he won his fight. Joanna is in the Hall of Fame. I mean, most of the guys I think that you guys have brought up and that team are either in the Hall of Fame or going to be in the Hall of Fame, and we can all kind of just retroactively look at it and go, yeah, probably 90% of these guys are going to go into the Hall of Fame at some point, or if they're not already. So we know what it was that you guys created, and now we know how truly amazing and impressive it is, which is fantastic. But you actually made your MMA debut back in '99, and
yeah, that was crazy. That was crazy.
At the time, like, first of all, the sport's not respected. They were calling it barbaric or human cockfighting. I think that was
John McCain. Yeah, John McCain called it human cockfighting, even though later on he admitted he had never seen it. He called it human cockfighting.
But I mean, even Dana says it. He's like, but if John McCain doesn't do that, the sport never gets to the level that it's supposed to get to. So I guess it's kind of like, cum see, cum sa. It worked out in the end, but it's like, god damn, that's a way to put it.
I think really, if you, so yeah, I'll go back to it, but along the vein of what you were just talking about, if the connection with the Fertitta brothers and someone that they were intimately involved with, I think it was actually one of the Fertitta brothers, wasn't it, that actually sat on the Nevada commission?
Yes, Lorenzo.
Yes. So Lorenzo, I mean, honestly, if you go back to it, things probably don't happen without Lorenzo being on that athletic board in Nevada, right? Because now they come up with what ultimately becomes the sanctioning, the unified rules, right? And so without Nevada sort of putting their stamp of approval on it, then the other states don't do the same, right? And I don't know, man. Fuck John McCain. Like, man, the guy never even watched the sport and has the balls to comment on it. You know what I mean? Like, bro, get out of here. You know what I mean? Like that I don't necessarily agree with what you're saying there. Like, without him, I mean, I understand Dana's point, but I don't really agree. I mean, I think that it's a typical politician to comment on and make a mockery of something they've never done themselves and would never have the balls to do themselves. And I don't know that he helped anything. In fact, he probably set the sport back years. I I think had it been allowed to continue and had the rules sort of unified and ultimately, man, any sport that starts like, I mean, it wasn't MMA back then, it was NHB, right? It was no holds barred. You could punch to the groin. I mean, pretty much the rules were you can't bite, you can't fish hook, you can't attack the eyes. Other than that, it's pretty much on. So I don't know. Maybe you don't end up having a commissioning and sanctioning bodies and et cetera if it isn't for John McCain. But I think ultimately that's the evolution of pretty much every sport, is that there's ultimately going to be a rule set. There's ultimately going to be an adopted rule set. They're going to unify it. They're going to have to try to have it as similar and as transparent as possible from state to state. I don't know, but hey, look, it ended up where it's supposed to be without the $50 million plus invested by the Fertitta brothers and Dana. I mean, what ends up happening in MMA? There wasn't really anybody else at the time. Pride was awesome, but you got to be a pretty hardcore fan to know about Pride,
Yeah, I'm one of those guys too. So I know a lot of people didn't know what the hell Pride was.
Back on fighting, I wasn't really going to fight, but I was training with guys that were fighting every day, and I was like, you know what? Like, I want to do this once. I'd like to get in the cage once. You know what I mean? And so an opportunity presented itself. My first fight was actually Tom Sauer. Tom had a knockout win over Valentino Overeem, or actually it might have been his brother. Yeah, Ed of knockout win over one of the Overeems. Tom died not that long ago, actually. Great guy, man. Great guy. We became really good friends, but he was my first fight ever. The promoter sort of downplayed his experience and his skill level and whatever. And so I ended up losing, the fight to him. I actually went blind in one eye for like 6 weeks after the fight. I was in like sort of like a teepee. I think I was winning the fight. I was winning the fight. I was ahead on the judges' scorecards when we stopped the fight, but I was in like a triangle, more like a diamond position. I was trying to work out of it. I couldn't see out of my right eye because he had hit some elbow strikes to the back of my head on a takedown. And I thought there was blood in my eye. When I went to wipe my eye, like there was no blood on my hand. And I looked at the ref and he's like, "You're not bleeding." And I was like, "I can't see out of my eye." And they stopped the fight. And I think it was about 6 weeks before I started getting vision back in that eye. I bruised my optic nerve pretty bad. So that was my first fight experience, was Tom Sauer. And my face, I looked like Darth Maul. We both did. I think I broke his foot. He broke my nose. Both my eyes were black. My face was a complete mess. His face was a complete mess. I kind of got emotional during the fight. Tom had Tourette's. I didn't know it. He was repeatedly telling me, "I love you," like saying all these crazy things. He used the N-word a lot as part of his Tourette's. So like I've got him against the cage, I whatever, and he's telling me love you, and throwing the words in there and stuff, and I was like, man, I'm gonna kill this guy. Like I got emotional, I kind of lost my cool, I hit him with the right hand, he fell backwards into the cage, and like he winked at me and blew me a kiss, and I was like, man, I'm gonna knock this guy out. Kind of ruined my game plan, honestly, and that was a valuable lesson for me. I think you learn more from your losses than your wins, but I was like, well, okay, can't get emotional during a fight,
No, definitely not. I mean, that's hilarious. You guys were wilding back at that time, man.
Yeah.
So I was looking at your accolades, and I have to say it looks like a fucking Costco receipt. At some point, IBJJF World's Masters Champion, 6-time Pan Am Champion, U.S. National BJJ Champion. The list goes on and on and on. But like ultimately, what is it that fuels you to compete under such high levels? And then, like you said earlier, maybe it is that you just like kind of let go of like, oh, I'm here where I want to be, so now like fuck everything else. But how do you get to these high levels of competition? And then when you get to those high levels, how do you just go out there and perform at that level?
So I think, again, like having a wrestling background and having wrestled in the Big Ten and wrestled in front of crowds like at Iowa and Penn State, and Penn State was just coming into the Big Ten when I was at Illinois. It was it was like, oh man, like we're not, like this conference isn't tough enough already, right? But I think having wrestled at that level, it sort of quells your nerves. And honestly, man, I have to be completely like candid. I don't think back when I was winning those things, the level of jiu-jitsu is at where it's at today. It's just, the jiu-jitsu is better today, man. There's more people doing it. There's a higher level. There's a higher level of technicality. Like you were talking about earlier, there's a lot more integration with wrestling. The leg lock game, has come so far. Like, who knows if I was to go back and do it again, if I would win those things or not. I don't know. You know what I mean? How would my training have changed? I mean, training methodologies, recovery methodologies, nutrition, supplementation, anabolics, growth hormone, all the things that have gotten thrown into, MMA and jiu-jitsu and whatever, like they have really changed the game. The game has become so much more scientific. The training methods, the heart rate monitoring, the recovery monitoring, like all of that stuff has changed so much. It's now so much more scientific than it used to be. I think it used to be just who's got bigger balls, who's willing to pull it up faster, who's willing to go harder, who's willing to keep going. You know what I mean? Like, I cannot tell you how many times I saw guys like get their wrist or their arm or their ankle or their whatever broken. I mean, look at Jacare when he fought Roger, right? Gets his arm broken, tucks it inside his belt. Let's finish, man. Like you don't see that these days, really, Thankfully so in some ways, and in other ways, like, wow, okay, I miss that. But I think I always just, I was pretty successful with my company. I was pretty successful in my professional life, and I think that something inside me has always been like, all right, well, I want to throw in and go against the best guys. I was at ADCC in 2005, and they came up to me and said, hey, we need somebody in the bracket. Would you jump in? And I was like, I had not trained for that level of a competition, And I was like, oh, hell yeah, of course, I had to go buy shorts, and I had to go to like one of the booths and buy shorts and whatever to compete. My match was Comprito. That was my first match. You know what I mean? And I lost on a ref's decision with no notice, no anything. But man, how can you not do that match? You know what I mean? Like, to me, that would never even occur to me to say no. It's like, wait, you want to throw me in the ADCC and compete against Comprito? Like, he was on a tear at that time. I think he'd won like 5 world championships or something. I don't know. I was like, absolutely, man, let's go, So it just never occurred to me not to want to do it.
I mean, I think there's something inside you built a little different because most guys are too afraid. But
really, I'd be afraid not to do it. Honestly, I think I couldn't live with myself if they offered me a match with Comprito and I was like, I haven't really been training. What, like, man, you're never gonna find out what you're made of unless you do it. You know what I mean? Like, to me, I want, my great uncle told me something one time, and I he drank way too much, and he knew it. He knew he was going to drink himself to death, but his outlook on life was like, I want to lay on my deathbed and say I wish I hadn't done that rather than I wish I would have. And he's like, I think if everybody lived their life that way, the world would be a better place. And I don't mean that from the standpoint of like harming other people, but like the things that you're afraid of are probably not really that important. You know what I mean? Like the fear is a way bigger task than the try. You know what I mean? Just the effort. You know?
Absolutely, I agree with that because my grandfather had a similar saying, and again, alcoholic as well. But my grandfather was special forces in the Dominican Republic. And we were sitting in the house one day, and I told my grandfather, I'd love to fight. He goes, why don't you? And I said, well, I could get hurt. I could, potentially die because some of these guys died in these fights back in the day, especially in boxing. And my grandfather said, I got to give you one piece of advice before I go. And I said, what's that? He goes, regret what you don't, not what you do. And I had to kind of stare at him twice because I was like, regret what you don't, not what you do. Now that I'm older, I'm like, I get it. Do the shit now. And then when you get older, don't regret that you did it. Regret that the chances you didn't take, because that's usually what happens. You're on your deathbed and you're going to go, damn, I should have did. Instead of that, just don't regret it. Go do crazy shit. And then when you're older, you'll be like, yo, remember when we did that crazy shit? I remember how much fun we had. Remember when I lost my tooth? That was a great time. We had a great fucking day. And that's the worst of it. And it's true. A lot of, especially my generation, we're so terrified because we were told to be perfect, to do everything right, to do the shit here, to get it done the first time. Don't make any mistakes. And I'm like, but where do you learn from that? You're never going to be better if you don't fuck up. You're never going to know what it's like to hit the lows until you hit the lows. And then when you get to the highest of highs, you can appreciate it more. But this is a bit of a controversial topic, and it's one that's become controversial through time. What do you think about weight cutting in MMA, and should there be more weight classes, or should guys start to like just lean out better and make the weight cut a little less intense than it's been lately? Or do you feel like the process overall is just because of the way it's changed now, where guys spend less time and, cutting the weight? I don't know really where this stands, but this is a difficult topic.
Man, my thought process on this has changed over the years for sure. Probably, so Ben Askren was one of my students up in Missouri. Him and Tyron Woodley and Mike Chandler and all those guys were in the room. And Ben and his brother Max's approach to weight cutting, or a lack of weight cutting, was really eye-opening for me. And I think I've heard Ben sort of say something similar to this. I'll probably bastardize a little bit of what he's saying, but to paraphrase, I think one of the things that has happened over the years is like, it used to be who was bigger, stronger, faster, tougher, and so the weight cut was more important. Now there is so much emphasis on diet, nutrition, strength training, technical abilities, etc., that the size difference is sort of not that much of an advantage anymore. And you'll see this over and over and over again, that smaller, more technical guys are beating bigger, strong guys. You see it a lot. And so I think weight cutting served its purpose at one point. I mean, I walked around in college at 235, 240, and I wrestled 190. And it would take me half a season to make the weight. And, I went to them and said, like, listen, I want to transfer. I can't wrestle 190 anymore. I can't make it. And they wouldn't let me transfer. They essentially, back then, if you didn't have your coach's approval to transfer, you had to sit out 2 years, which was pretty much all I had left in my college career. So, here I am wrestling heavyweight, trying to make 190 for, the season. And I had my LBM done like 7 or 8 years ago, and it was like 226. So it's like, I don't know that my LBM and my muscle mass is now, or 7 or 8 years ago, was more than college. So what was my actual LBM in college, and how much was I actually just sucking water? I had a lot of repetitive injuries that were just, I think they were just being dry all the time. I just wasn't hydrated, and I think that takes a toll on your body. So, and we don't know what the long-term effects on dehydration and weight cutting are going to be with CTE, right? We haven't had enough experience yet to know what's going to happen to these guys' brains that are dehydrating and then rehydrating and the weight cut and et cetera. So I'm not a big fan of the weight cut. I'd rather see guys compete closer to their natural weight. Max Askren was competing at 197 in wrestling in college. He was one of the few guys that I encouraged to cut a little weight because he was walking around at like 188, 190. I'm like, man, your problem, Max, is that you can beat anybody in a single match. But when you get to tournaments and you have to repeatedly wrestle guys who are bigger, stronger, just as technical, et cetera, like that begins to take its physical toll on you. If you would just cut the 4 or 5 pounds and go to 84, and I think part of it was strategy for a lineup standpoint, like the team was better with him at 97 at some point, but from a selfish standpoint, they were better with him going to 84. And when he finally went down, he won his national championship, and it's where he should have been all along. He probably would have been a 3 or 4 time NCAA champ, very similar to his brother, who was a 4-time finalist and 2-time champ, had he been wrestling at the right weight class. So I think there's that balance of what's my frame? Where do I walk around at? What's my build? Can I, I got a guy in the room right now who's, a hell of a hard worker, and he played college basketball. He's like 6'3", and he fights 170. He could fight 85, but he doesn't have to cut much weight to fight 170. So, he's just a lean guy. Okay, well, his weight cut is minimal to be at 70. That makes sense. But were he to be heavier, he's big enough, long enough, framey enough to fight 85 if he really wanted to. So I think it just depends on people's genetic makeup, like I've got these really thick wrists. I got really, if I go to an event and they have a wristband, it never fits me. Never. My son has the same problem. My son played the defensive line for Nebraska in college, and he just got his black belt a few years ago, and he's really, really talented, but he's a monstrosity of a human being. He's not making anything but heavyweight ever. You know what I mean? And so I think it depends on what your body mass is, what your BMI is, what your genetics are. But I think weight cutting served a purpose at one point. I think it serves less of a purpose now.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there. I've watched my nephews. My nephew Rafi Jr. He just went to the New York State wrestling championships. He won his division. He won Division 2, and they won that one, which was wonderful. Both my nephews. I think I cried that day. That was one of the best days in our family. But his father and I were talking, and I go, "Hey, Rafi, his father's Rafi Senior." He said, "What are you going to do? Where's little Rafi going to wrestle at? He's going to go down like 120, 124. We're going to go lower." He said, "Nah, he's walking around closer to 140. I think I'll put him in the 130s. I don't want him to cut too much weight. It's going to, first of all, he's like, it's going to fry his brain. He's got to go through school. He's going to have to go compete regularly." And then he's like, and then what? He's going to come out of the season damaged, trying to fix himself back up for next season. He's like, for all that, I'll just let him cut less weight, and we'll see how he does. And if he feels strong at that weight, I'll make sure he's strong enough, he's conditioned enough, he should be fine. And it worked out. My nephew went finally to state, and we, even though we lost, I was happy. I was like, "Dog, you got to state, though. Do you understand? There's a wrestler in every..."
Which in New York is a big accomplishment, man. It's a big accomplishment. I mean, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Ohio. I mean, they're all really, really good wrestling states. A lot of those guys are state qualifiers. They are state champs in other states. It's just a fact.
Yeah. And I see it a lot too, that there are certain states where wrestling is prominent. Luckily, we're in one of those states where we have like a wonderful wrestling teams, and we have some of the better wrestlers. But when I watched my nephew not cut himself down like before, his last weight cut for last season, it was hard. We were just watching him, and his mom would say it all the time. She's like, "It almost feels like we're watching him die." And I was like, "That's kind of what the process was like." And she was like, "What was it like when you wrestled?" Because I only wrestled one season, and I couldn't do it after that because I just kept getting injured. But my brother's like, "Oh, when we used to wrestle with Danny, we used to put him in a hot shower, real like crazy hot water, Epsom salt. We'd have him in there for a while. Then we'd pull him out. We'd have 2 comforters on the floor. He'd throw himself on the floor. We'd wrap him in towels. We'd put him in that for like 2 or 3 hours." He's like, "We literally spent 6 hours cutting weight," and he would just be in there crying just the whole time. And I was like, "Yeah, I would cry the entire time." I knew it was part of the process. The first 3 hours, I was great. I was like, this is just what you do when you wrestle. After about the 3rd or 4th hour, that's when I would start to I would be like, "I don't want to do this shit anymore. Like, I don't want to do any of this." And my brothers were tough. They just picked me up. They grabbed me, 2 of them, and throw me in the shower, and then pull me back out of the tub, and they did that 3 or 4 times straight back to back. Now that we're not seeing that.
Yeah, when I was in college, we had a rule. We had a wet sauna, which, you know, was always better to cut weight in a wet sauna than a dry sauna. So, you know, like a steam sauna. And the rule was if you passed out, you had to let them sit for 15 minutes before you pulled them out. So we're never allowed to go in there alone. And, you know, some of the worst fights I've ever seen were guys pulled the guys out too early. You know, like, man, I was unconscious. I'm not suffering at all. I'm alive. Let me finish my sweat. You know what I mean? It was crazy, man. College was, there was not a lot of focus on the science surrounding athleticism. It was just, you know, how tough are you? You know, there wasn't we didn't have a nutritionist. You know what I mean? Like, we're all cutting weight with no nutrition guidance. We're doing what we think is the right thing to do, which mostly is starvation, you know, and dehydration. You know, it's just not good for your body. You know, back then, you know, I ripped my big toenail off literally like 20 minutes before a match trying to open a door. The door was always stuck. I'm pulling on it. It finally comes open. And it literally just rips my big toenail off as I open the door. I got to wrestle like within an hour of that point. They just tape it up, shoot it up, and tell me, hey, come get that cut off so your toe doesn't die after the match, you know? We would go, you know, there was a big cabinet there, and it was just filled with drugs. And I'd go in there and grab a bottle of, you know, 100 Percocet because your shoulder or your knee or, you know, whatever it was that was bothering you, you just grab it, you write down, you know, Wade Rome, 100 Percocet, you know, whatever. And at the end of the week, the doctor come in and write a script to match everything that we took. So it was crazy, man. There was no focus on the science of athleticism. There was no focus on nutrition. There was no focus on, you know, weightlifting was just, you know, the strength and conditioning back then was just nuts. It was like, how much can you lift for how many reps? There was no science to it. There was no movement mechanics. There was just, things have come so far, and I'm so glad, you know, to watch my son play at Nebraska and to see the focus that they had and to see it continue to evolve to this day and watch, you know, the science behind fighters and other athletes, you know, high level athletes. It's like, what an evolution. And it's going to continue. It's going to continue. You know, there's going to be a continuing focus on so many things that we don't even know about yet, you know, recovery and muscle building and mobility and flexibility. I mean, none of those things used to be focused on. Now they're pretty much focused on by every like serious camp.
Yeah, we're seeing it more and more, and it's become such a great thing to see it be more regular now than it used to be. I think that's what made the big difference before, and then now that we all know, like, oh, wait a minute, you can't do that. You're gonna tear something. You're gonna pull something. We don't want that. But you have been in the room with multiple world champions, not just guys that you trained with, but guys that you have trained. And again, you had some of the best wrestlers ever. But you had Tyron Woodley, who I always see on your Instagram all the time. He's always post on some of your posts. But it's cool to see it. But when you get a fighter in front of you, is there a specific factor that you see in the ones that become champions? Because you've been around so many and you guys have produced so many champions at this point. Is there like an X factor, or is there just something to like the work ethic? What do you usually see when you see a guy come in and you're like, okay, this could be a world champion?
Hard work, coachability. Coachability is so, like, there are so many people. I don't want to name any names, but there are guys that had more talent. And
ladies and gentlemen, we're at the halfway mark with our episode with Wade Rome. This is a fantastic episode. He gave us so much of his time. Just wanted to remind you again that the sponsor of today's episode is none other than Sanibel with Sanibel.com. You can go get amazing gear, the type of stuff the guys in the UFC are utilizing, just like Gilbert Burns, Sean O'Malley, and a lot of the fighters that were recently on the UFC 299 card. So if you want to go ahead, get yourself some of this gear, I would highly suggest you go to Sanibel.com/GOTDAM or use goddamn promo code at checkout. That promo code again is GOTDAM. No, not the one your mama said you can't say. And if you utilize that promo code, you get 10% off, and a portion of the proceeds go to our show to help us grow. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And make sure to go down to the description in case you want to follow any of our guests. Now back to our pod.
Talent and their little finger than people have in their entire body. But they just weren't hard workers and they weren't coachable. And, again, going back to my great uncle, he always used the phrase like, God didn't give snakes wings for a reason. You know what I mean? And it's like, okay, well, that guy probably is a world beater if he's coachable and if he works hard. But, really, Tyron Woodley is a fantastic athlete, really smart guy, emotionally stable. But even beyond that, he's a hard worker and he was coachable. He listened and he still does to this day. And he, honest to God, like, he's never changed. You know what I mean? If I text him right now, he'd text me back in 30 seconds. I mean, he's a superstar. He's you go someplace with him, it's a big deal for him to get through a crowd. You know what I mean? He's got to stop and sign autographs and take pictures and whatever else. But he's never changed. He's never changed. And I think that, like, that firmly rooted in who he is. He had 12 or 13 brothers and sisters growing up. His mom manages him to this day. So he's like firmly rooted in his family and his foundation and his faith. But he also is coachable. He's athletic. And, honestly, like, man, if you had a daughter and she was going to marry Tyron, you'd be thrilled because he's just a phenomenal human being. So I don't know, man. I think coachability, hard work, and probably being emotionally grounded in who they are, knowing like who they are, what they do, and not getting easily distracted. As you start going up the ranks and you start making money and whatever, it's really easy to look at that bright, shiny thing that's over there, rather than staying focused on what you're doing. And I think that the best guys in the world have just been singularly focused, they've been grounded, they've been coachable, and they work hard. You don't realize how hard, somebody, this guy's just so naturally talented. Well, yeah, but they also work their ass off. You look at a guy like Ben Askren. I remember talking to his parents. We were talking about him fighting, and so I invited his parents to go to this comedy show. It was a comedy show or a concert. I think it was a comedy show. So we were just talking in between, acts or whatever else, and he lost like his first 50 matches in wrestling. And I guess his dad at some point had said to him, like, hey, maybe this is not the sport for you. And he was like, no, I'm just figuring it out. Like, trust me, I'm working on things. I see what's going to happen. And he was young. He was really young when this happened. I don't remember what age he was, but his dad's telling me this story. And then he said, Ben started winning. And once he started winning, it was like, wow, okay. Like, there was just a flip switch, a switch flipped and he started winning. But again, like, people don't see how hard Ben worked. People don't see how innovative Ben was in his wrestling. I mean, if you really look at it, he's like the grandfather of funk. All the funk that you see in collegiate wrestling. I mean, I was watching some of the Big Ten championships yesterday. And like I said, I was at the Zapatero event last night. I had a guy compete and there were a bunch of really good guys competing there. Man, you see that funk. Honestly, like, so much of that goes back to Ben Askren. The guy was a 4-time NCAA finalist, a 2-time champ, and he was doing things at the time that nobody even understood. Like, why does he do that? I mean, he made really, really good wrestlers look really pathetic. He worked his ass off to do it. He had an innovative approach that was different than anybody else took, and he made people look silly because of it. But it was his work ethic and coachability that was behind it.
Yeah, I had a feeling that you were going to say coachability because I've heard Adam say it too. Coach Adam always goes, it's different to have a fighter who's coachable versus one who's not. And I had to ask, I was like, what the hell is coachable? Like, you just tell me what to do and I do it. And he goes, exactly. And most guys will never get that. They'll never comprehend that. I tell you to get the fuck up, get the fuck up. If I tell you to go this way, go this way. I'm not telling you that because I want you to get hurt. I'm obviously looking at something and I can see something you're not. I got your back. I have your blind side. Trust that I'm going to tell you what to do. And I was like, okay, cool. I shut the fuck up and I do what you tell me to do, coach. He said, yeah, a lot of guys, you'd be surprised. You get into a room with a lot of pros and there are a few pros that are like, he's a pro. Because his coach just told him to do the opposite of that and he decided to do it. So what the hell is he doing?
Yep.
So,
and there's coachability to a point too. There's guys that are coachable until they get a certain level of success. And then they they lose the coachability. They think that, oh, well, I can do this. And it's like, no. Like, you need less coaching, but you still need to listen. And you'll see it. You'll see the guys fall off. I had a guy in my room in Missouri who was obsessed with getting in the UFC. And I said, listen, man, getting in the UFC is not the hard part. Staying in the UFC is the hard part. Right. And he was very coachable. He's a very coachable guy. And, his evolution was, it was literally like fighting with a joystick for me in the corner on so many different, fights. And at some point, he started getting a level of success and his coachability level started to drop. And there's a difference between having self-confidence and being able to do things because you've gotten to the point where you don't need the coaching versus thinking you no longer need coaching at all. And there's a big difference there. And I watched it. I watched the evolution of it. And, he actually ended up leaving our gym to go coach someplace else, and something that was like, I don't know that that's the best move from a career standpoint for you. And he got in the UFC, won his first fight, lost the next two, and never saw the UFC again. So, and he was a guy that could probably have stayed in the UFC and made a good run, but just not coachable, or became uncoachable, and that's the other the transition of it is, as you get better, do you still listen? Do you have a group of core people that you trust and you put your faith in, and can you grow in as an athlete and still be coachable? And I there's not a lot of guys that can do that.
Yeah, I think we saw that last night with Dustin, where I think Mike Brown told him stop going for the guillotine, and he went for it, but it was out of instinct. People were like, it wasn't that he was doing it not to listen to his coach; it was instinctive. That was the first thing he thinks of when someone shoots on him. So he did that, and then he caught himself, and then he was like, "Oh wait, shit, yeah, right. Coach told me not to do this," and got back up. I was like, "Let me not do this again." And similarly to what you said, he probed, and then I've heard Dustin and Justin Gaethje talk to their coaches in the corner. I love that approach that they have. They'll walk into the corner, they'll put their foot on the stool, they'll drink some water, and then coach is like, "All right, how you feeling?" Like, and they'll just start talking like nothing's happening. There's not a fight behind us. Who cares? Whatever. And then they'll, "Hey, what do you think you're doing good?" "Oh man, I think I hit this and this." "What is he hitting me with on this side?" "Oh, he did this to you. We can shut that down though, because remember when you did this move? Yeah, do that same pattern. You're gonna be good." And then they go right back in, and Dustin he locks in and he does it. And I think that's another thing that I think over time, as you're watching it live, it starts to make sense when you can connect the dots like that. Because it's like you said, some guys, they get too successful, the coach will tell them, don't do this, and they go right to doing the same thing over and over and over again. And it starts to, you get a little infuriated because you're like, man, brother, your coach just told you, like, then you go out and see them do the opposite of what coach just told them to do. And again, like you said, coachability. But do you think that because of the success gets to them to the point where they think that, like, the coach's voice is no longer valid, or is it just that they think that they can just, like, I can do whatever because I've achieved it before, and they're just trying to, like, what do you think that is?
No, that's probably above my pay grade to analyze, right? But I think there are certain guys that every bit of success that I've ever had, there's a great quote. If I've seen further than others, it's because I stood on the shoulders of giants. That is so true in so many ways, because anything that I've ever accomplished in my life, there were good people behind me that shaped the way that not only I trained, that I competed, that I thought about things, etc. And I think that there was probably a point in my life where I didn't believe that. But I think as you mature, you realize, like, no, that really is the case. Like, these certain things are really important, and they have shaped me foundationally. And when I go back to that foundation, that's where I have the most success, right? When I compete at the World Masters, I didn't really want to compete. There was a couple guys in the gym that were talking about competing. They're like, "Compete, coach." And I'm like, man, I don't know that I have it left in the tank to do that, And they're like, come on. So we trained our asses off, and it ended up that the two other guys that wanted to compete were hurt, and I wasn't. So I end up the only one competing, you know what I mean? And it's like, I really, I think because, you know, I'm approaching 60 years old now. So it's like, I got to go back to the well and look at, all right, well, you know, what do I know that works as a process? And I think it's just a maturity thing. Some guys have the maturity to realize like, hey, I'm better and I can analyze a lot of things on my own, but I still need to be coachable and I need to have somebody outside of me that I trust that I can listen to. And that's true like financially, that's true athletically, that's true strength and conditioning, that's true of nutrition. I mean, all these things that really come into the fold, like we were talking about earlier, you know, there's so much more of a scientific approach to so much of this that that you need to have people that you trust, and having people that you trust around you that will tell you the truth and tell you when you're fucking up and tell you when you're getting away from the things that make you good and have made you good historically. I think having a relationship where you can be honest with the people that are around you is a big deal. If that answers your question.
No, I think it does, because I think that a lot of it is you kind of have to have the right person in your corner, the right voice in your head almost. Like, I think as I've grown older, I'm realizing like some of the times when I did very stupid things in the gym that, you know, I could have had a really successful round, or I could have learned something really well done and had a great technique. I fucked it up because my ego was like, yo, you don't need to do that. Remember last time you did this shit? You just slammed the motherfucker. Just do that. And that's exactly what happens. I think that voice inches in your head and your ego starts to get the best of you. Luckily for me at the time, I had a pretty good coach. My coach pulled me aside. He said, listen, I want to see that shit again because you're capable of so much more. And if you keep that shit up, you're going to be one of those guys that no one remembers. And I don't think you want that. And then that was like, that was the bell that rang true to me. I was like, oh shit, I don't want to be one of those guys no one remembers. Fuck that shit. Let's leave that in the back. Let's get what we got to get done. But you've coached so much, and now I'm happy to say this one, but come April, you're opening a 10,000 square foot facility. Can you tell me about the location, and maybe why you chose that particular location? I know you stated that you had chosen the location for the original ATT spot, but I know that you pretty much have a great eye for looking at something and going, well, this is what it is, and this is what it could be. So can we talk about that beautiful facility coming in April?
Yeah, so we've sort of hopped a few locations in the past 4 or 5 years. It's just the way that things worked out. You know, when I originally was when I got back into coaching, when I came back to Florida in 2012, I was just sort of floating around to gyms. I had no interest in owning my own academy. I did not want to open my own academy. I'm retired. Like, it's, for me, it's just, I do jiu-jitsu because I enjoy it. I do jiu-jitsu because I like to be around people doing jiu-jitsu. And, you know, I went to a gym and the guy asked me if I would, you know, like, hey, if you're going to come in and roll, would you mind like teaching on the night that you're here rolling? And somebody's going to teach. I was like, yeah, of course, I'll teach. You know, that's a fair deal. I'll come in the nights I'm here, I'll teach. And then it became 1 day a week, then 2 days a week, then 3 days a week, and then we were partners, and we just didn't see eye to eye. And I think, you know, my daily dose was doing really well, and I was doing a lot of seminars, and I was getting my name back out there and doing a lot of stuff. And I think there was a lot of jealousy on you know, my partner's part, and he said some really horrible things and did some really horrible things, and I was like, fuck this, I'm out of here. Like, I don't have patience or time for this. So we moved into an immediate location. I took most of the upper belts with me. You know, a lot of the white belts don't know the difference, but the upper belts do. And we were only in that location for a short period of time. Moved to a different location, which was pretty good home for us, but with COVID, there was a lot of like downsizing and all kinds of stuff going on. So the building that we were occupying was owned by a guy who had like a 35,000 square foot office space. Because of COVID, they were downsizing and they were going to take back over the building. He made me an offer. I had found a location that had better visibility. Actually, one of my instructors found it. Again, because of COVID, we were able to get a much better price on it than we would have gotten otherwise. You know, it was like $25 a square foot, and we got it for like a third of that, which made it affordable. And then Tuesday morning went bankrupt nationally, and there was a Tuesday morning in our plaza like 4 doors down from us. So that space became available. The facility approached me and said, hey, do you have an interest in this space? And I said, I do, but it's premature. If we could structure it where, you know, I've got a scaling rent thing, you know, where I'm paying basically the same amount I'm paying now. And I will do that for the next couple of years while I grow it. And then, it'll go up after that. So just right time, right place, right opportunity, good exposure. We're doing really well in the location that we're at. My wife found a gym that went out of business over in the Orlando area. This guy had spent a tremendous amount of money outfitting the place. I made him an offer for everything. He didn't take it initially, but he ended up calling me back and said, "Hey, if that offer is still good, I'll take it." I said, "It's still good." So, we bought everything, and the facility is going to be amazing. It's world class. I mean, it's almost 11,000 square feet. We're going to have 4,000 square foot of mats. We got a weight room, a cage, an octagon, a boxing ring, a hanging bag area, a theater room, a pro shop, men's and women's locker room, a kids room. Like we're going to have everything we need there. And that'll be long-term growth prospects for us.
Well, Coach, I got to say congratulations, because that sounds fucking badass.
It's pretty dope. We're excited. We'll hopefully be in there like April, May. We're doing the build out ourselves. So it's taken a little bit of time, and we've kind of changed our minds on a few things as we've evolved and as some stuff has become available. So it's going to be cool. It's going to be real cool. We're going to have a grand opening, which I'm sure Adam will get an invite to come down for. And if you want to come down, you're welcome to do it, bro. That'd be fun.
Oh, man, I greatly appreciate that. Thank you so much. Definitely got to see what the timing looks like. But yeah, if Adam goes, I'm expecting pictures. Because I want it.
Adam's so good, man. Adam is so good. He almost quit on me a few times, but I'm glad he didn't.
Me too, because if he doesn't come into my life, I'd be honest with you, I probably would have quit on the idea of even training, let alone wanting to compete. I still want to compete. I'm older, but I ain't even afraid to do this shit. I'm happy about it. But with Adam around, I just feel like there's a level of zen when Adam's around me, because he'll just tell me something very cut and dry in a way that I can I can process that. I can deal with that, what you're telling me. This new location, though, nearly 11,000 square feet. Will this be under the Control Jiu Jitsu banner, or will this have another name for this particular location?
No, I'm going to stick with the Control. We've done really well with the name. I think it sort of epitomizes my concepts of jiu-jitsu. I'm really big on positional control, on, one of the things that I said early on, it's funny. Life is weird, like these weird, synchronicities and idiosyncrasies that happen, and they sort of shape the way that you look at things. And I've always said, like, control your mind, control your emotions, control your body, control your opponent. The rest will take care of itself. And that's really where kind of Control Jiu-Jitsu came from, was, just a philosophy of like, do these things and the rest will take care of itself. And it's really true. It's really true. I see guys like, coaching nationally now, they're starting to make some names for themselves. And I hear them say things that, I've evolved to believe, over the years. And it's like, wow, it's really cool to see the validation of a lot of the things that I believe. I'm big on positional and conceptual understandings rather than moves. I don't teach moves. I teach techniques, and I teach the concept of how a technique works and why it works. Because if I teach you an armbar from guard, you learn an armbar from guard. If I teach you how an armbar works and why it works and the concept of the application of it, you see it from everywhere, right? I got a guy last night. He just got his purple belt not long ago. He competed last night. This is probably the hardest working guy I've ever met in my life. And that includes pretty much everybody I've ever worked with. And he's 2 years in, he's a purple belt. He came as a black belt in judo. And this guy is going to be a world beater. And the one thing that I will say about him is that he has bought totally into the idea of understanding the fundamental concepts of what we do and how we do it. And he's, like he said to me the other day, he's like, I see it everywhere now. I see it, everything that I do. I'm trying to get him to incorporate, he's really long-legged. So I've tried to work a reverse triangle game into his, jiu-jitsu. Some reason, just positionally, the way that he plays jiu-jitsu, he ends up getting in that position a lot. And I'm like, you need to start recognizing the reverse triangle. And he started to do it. And all of a sudden, man, his level has just creeped up, you know? And so it's a lot of fun to watch these guys and these people that are adopting the concepts and ideas and fundamentals that we've sort of taken with the Control name and put into like a moniker, for lack of a better term, you know, and it works, man. The process works if you trust it, and getting people to trust it is the hard part sometimes.
Yeah, I think because of how much tradition and like what we're all used to when we first do our first jiu-jitsu class years ago. I'm a guy that started BJJ in 2009. I mean, I was terrible, and then I left for several years, and then I think after the Navy, I was like, I want to go back. Kind of wanted to see what, you know, if I can still do this. I fell in love again with it again after the fact. But there's Coach Greg Souders out in Maryland. I'm not sure if you're you know who he is. He's the guy that runs Standard Jiu-Jitsu.
He was at the event last night.
Yeah, he's a wonderful coach, but he's got what I think he calls it the ecological approach, where he teaches exactly what you just stated. I was like, that sounds exactly like what you're stating. I think you might have been on it first, Coach. But he stated that he doesn't do the exact same thing. He doesn't teach the move. He just teaches the concept, and then he'll use games to kind of stimulate concepts and positions so that they kind of understand what they're looking at first. Do you think that approach over time? Do you think that will make jiu-jitsu better? Like if people take the mentality that you and Greg Souders take, which is like, I'm not just going to teach the guy an armbar from guard, like you said. I'm going to teach him, why is that position work better? Why does it not work better? Why does it work for your game? What kind of game do you want to play? Do you think it's going to just evolve jiu-jitsu so much faster at this point with what we know now?
So it's interesting. I think that jiu-jitsu is cyclical, right? If you look back, not this last ADCC, but the ADCC before that, you would see that there was a huge emphasis on leg locks, right? Leg locks were what was finishing everybody. The last ADCC, you saw that pretty much everything was counter leg lock. Everything was pressure passing. Everything was body lock passing, staying out of the leg lock battle, staying out of the leg lock game. Not that there weren't leg lock finishes, but you saw the evolution of jiu-jitsu from like leg lock entries and leg lock attacks to working around the people who are good at leg locks. And you saw what happened to Lachlan, right? Like, you know, you watch that setup, you know, I don't think the Ruotolo brothers get enough credit. If you watch that match between Lachlan and Ruotolo, there was a video I saw a bunch of years ago, and it was a crocodile. And this crocodile would come close to the edge to get fed. Okay. And over a period of time, this crocodile was backing away from the edge so that the trainer had to lean further out to feed this crocodile. And the trainer recognized what was happening, that this crocodile was trying to get him to lean further out, ultimately probably to make him the meal, right? So if you watch the Ruotolo brothers with Lachlan and you watch the attack and where Lachlan was going inverted, if you watch Ruotolo slowly just start increasing his distance from the inverted guard to make Lachlan extend his arm all the way out to the point that he finally takes advantage of it, that's the evolution of jiu-jitsu. The evolution of jiu-jitsu is pattern recognition, like we were talking about earlier with Dustin. The evolution of jiu-jitsu is understanding leverage, pressure, and biomechanics. And I had the opportunity to watch Souder Corner last night. He repeatedly talked about connection. He repeatedly talked about leverage. He repeatedly talked about position. He repeatedly talked about separation and joining, right? Separating the legs, joining the legs. Like, it was fun, you know? And for me, it's like, okay, well, you know, I feel like in so many ways I'm an old school coach, but I feel like in so many ways I spend so much time. I don't think most of my students know how much time that I actually spend analyzing matches and going back and watching things. And I, you know, you develop an eye over a period of time for things. And, I'll watch a match and I'll listen to the other people in the room talk about the match. And my takeaway versus everybody else in the room is completely different. And it's not that I'm wrong. I think there's just like what I see in the match and what I see that made the person successful or unsuccessful is completely different than what other people see. And so I think maybe that's just an experience thing and a maturity thing over a period of time. But I think the sport is going to be better because of guys like Josh Ledoux and Souter and Keenan Cornelius. I don't think gets enough credit for like some of the innovations that he's come along with. John Danaher bores me to fucking death. I've got to put him on like 1.5, 2 times speed to watch him, but there's no denying that he's a positional genius. You know what I mean? Like I got to double the speed to watch the instructionals, and I've got to just like fast forward to it. But I mean, he'll lull you to sleep, but he'll probably kill you doing it. So I think there definitely needs to be that more scientific approach. There needs to be that approach to, I mean, really, if you look at jiu-jitsu, it is a functional chess match. That's all it is. So how do you get the better leverage? How do you get the better physiologic function out of the position? How do you increase your leverage or decrease somebody else's leverage through positioning? And what does your connection with the other person have to do with all of that? If you're trying to submit somebody, then space is your enemy. If you're trying to avoid a submission, space is your friend. When you take and carry that concept out into leverage and physiologic function of the body, etc., when I teach an armbar, when I teach a Kimura, when I teach anything like that, the first thing you'll hear me talk about is like, how does this work? How does a Kimura work? Right? A Kimura isn't an arm lock. A Kimura is a shoulder lock. Why does it work? Well, it works because we're impinging the movement of the shoulder. If the arm is extended away from the body, the arm is very flexible, but the closer the arm gets to the body, the less flexible the shoulder is. That's how a Kimura works. I do my Kimuras different than everybody else, but if I get one on you and I get your arm back close to your body, you're not leaving. You're not leaving with that arm. You're going to tap or I'm leaving with it. It's only a leverage thing. It's just understanding how the body works and the biomechanics of it. So I think guys like Souter and Josh Ledoux, who does not get the credit that he deserves. I mean, he's a good Sean Applegate up at 10th Planet in Atlanta. Phenomenal coach, young guy too, which is great. Souter's young, relatively young. Josh is young. These guys, these up and coming guys that are, and there's a lot of guys look at the Mendez brothers out at AOJ. I mean, so much of what they're doing and so much of what they've done, whether they would articulate it the same way or not, is very similar in pattern recognition and leverage and understanding, the concepts of how things work. That's the future. And we're only going to see more of it, man. I got people who have been training with me. So I've got a girl that's getting ready to leave for college right now. I got a girl that just left for college. They've been training me 9-10 years now. And to watch the evolution of their game and to watch them like start coaching new students when new students come in and whatever, and to hear them not only repeat what I've said, but improve upon it. Man, where are those people going to be in 20 years? You know what I mean? Like, we're going to be better as a sport for it. We really are.
Yeah, I'm seeing it as well, Coach. I think that's phenomenal.
If we can survive the New World Order and all the bullshit that's going on, don't get me started on all that.
I know. I feel you. There's a lot of. I just feel like I was talking to a friend of mine from the UK, and he was like, "How do you live in the States?" And I was like, "Dude, it feels like we try to survive our day to day and just get by, and then there's all this fuckery going on, and we're just trying to just coexist together and be cool, and everything's all right." And then there's always got to be some fucking body, some fucking where, in some fucking dark room sitting there doing some stupid shit that we don't really agree with or respect, trying to fuck with us. And that's pretty much what it's been for the past like decade now. And it's starting to piss me off a little bit to the point that like even I'm like I might have to go. Like I'm starting to get a little too pissed off right now. Because what the French did, I hate to say it, I think America's going to have to do the same shit that the French did to their government, because their government pissed them off and they went right up to their front door. And they didn't do it like, it wasn't a violent thing. It wasn't violent at all. But it was like, we're going to stand here. We're going to make our point made. We're going to do it in a way that we don't hurt anybody, but we're not going to take this shit lying down. And I don't think that we do that here in this country. And I feel like all my friends who are still serving, who have long contracts, who've been doing this shit for, 8 years now, almost 9, I just feel like it's spitting in their face when half the time we don't take advantage of our rights here. I mean, I'm also a little pent up from it too, so I don't want to go too deep into the rabbit hole. I want to keep to BJJ and the beautiful sport that we love. But you've promoted so many BJJ black belts, my coach Adam Colorado included, who just got his first degree, which I think I was tearing up when I saw the picture. But do you remember the first black belt you ever promoted, and what was that moment that what was the aha moment where you were like, yeah, he's ready for his black belt? Like, what is that like? Can you talk us through some of that?
Honestly, what's interesting about that is the first black belt that I ever awarded. Well, I guess the Lennon brothers would be the first black belts. They were really under a black belt that was training with me at the time, Francisco France. So really, he's the one that awarded them the black belts. So probably the Lennon brothers would be the first two. They weren't my direct black belts, but I was Francisco or Kiko France, who is probably to this day still the best jiu-jitsu guy I've ever rolled with, period. I mean, he's amazing. He awarded them their black belts. So they were probably the first two guys that got their black belts from me. The first one that I actually awarded, I regret. I no longer have affiliation or association with, so I learned a lot from that. But since that time, you live and learn, right? You live and learn, and I think the one hard thing that I've learned over the years is that not everybody is what they appear to be, and you really have to be able to look into somebody's soul. And I think that if you promote someone to black belt and you don't train with them very much, and you don't peer into their soul, and you don't see where, I mean, I don't know how to explain it, but I think that there's a certain connection that develops when you roll with somebody. And the higher belt that they are, when you roll with them, I think the connection is deeper from the standpoint of you understand their propensity to quit. You understand their propensity to succeed. You understand their ability to endure. You understand their ability to suffer. You understand their ability to inflict suffering. You understand their technical, emotional, physical makeup so much better. I think probably the biggest evolution in understanding who I think is deserving of a black belt and who I would promote really revolves around like having work with them on that level, like rolling with them, understanding who they are. Do they quit in certain positions? Are they innovative? Are they constantly looking for a new way to improve? How do they treat the people who are around them? Right? Like I don't watch so much how black belts treat other black belts. I watch how black belts treat the brand new student. I watch how black belts treat the people who are struggling in the academy, who need the most attention. Do they pawn that off on other people in the academy, or do they do it themselves with the help of other people in the academy? Because there's a big difference. So, promoting black belts is something that I have done very rarely. I have 7 black belts after all this time. I'm going to have another one pretty soon. I'm promoting a guy in our academy, Terrence Wolford, in probably April or May when we move into the new space. But Adam is one of them. Your guy. My oldest son is a black belt now. Dusty Rhodes, Mike Paradis, the Lennon brothers. Really, that's it. I have not promoted that many guys, and I think it's one, I haven't had an academy long-term enough at one location for that sort of to happen. But 2, I'm very selective in who I promote, and how I promote them. Hope that answered your
No,
question.
it did. It absolutely did, because I think when you're looking at it from that perspective, it allows us to see exactly how you think and how you put it together. I mean, you know the game better than, fucking 90-something% of the world. So it feels kind of cool to hear what it is that you're looking at overall as a practitioner. And being that you are a beyond proficient practitioner, what do you think is the best way for students to become proficient, maybe just productive as they're learning? Like if, your fellow white belt walks into the room and he's trying to understand the game a little better, or maybe trying to figure out like, hey, how can I become better overall? Not maybe worried about the belt, but more like, how can I make my game go from where it is to where it could potentially be one day in a faster period of time?
Well, that's a good question. So I think the hardest part in teaching jiu-jitsu to new students is to get them to not lie to themselves. Certain people have a propensity to be good at certain things, and to try to understand, to leverage those skill sets while also improving things that you are not good on. So I think the biggest piece of advice, and I say it probably twice a week in my academy, if not more, don't be afraid to fail. Because the failure is what makes you better, not the success. I'm constantly preaching when you come into the room, like, do not try to win every round. If you try to win every round, you're only doing the things that you're good at. What you should try to do is to improve the things that you're not good at. As a college wrestler coming in, when I first started training with Marcelo Silveira, he literally told me, you're always going to get the takedown if you want it. You're always going to be good on top. But sooner or later, you're going to end up on the bottom, and you're going to get killed on the bottom. So all you're going to do for the next year is work from the bottom. And he had a bamboo stick. And if I wasn't back on the bottom by the time he got to me, he would welt my back with the thing. And there were times I wanted to stand up and punch him in the face. He hit me hard. But he was right. He was 100% right. If I watch guys who were like sort of my age peers and time frame peers, like Mark Kerr and Mark Coleman, who was at Ohio State when I was at Illinois, like Kevin Randleman, those guys never evolved a jiu-jitsu game. They were wrestlers who threw punches, but they never evolved a jiu-jitsu game. And it was like, how do you get better? How do you get better if you're not going to learn and draw from everything that you can draw from? So I'm constantly preaching, like, do the things that you're not good at, become better at the things that you're not good at, practice the things that you're not good at, while also leveraging the things that you are good at, and you will get better at a rapid pace. I get submitted in the room all the time because I'm constantly trying to refine what it is that I do and how I do it. I don't worry about it. I honestly don't worry about it at all. I focus on, like, all right, today I'm going to do these things. I feel like this lacks in my game right now. And a lot of times for me, it's like physical, I popped my groin the other night, like, all right, well, what am I going to be able to do now? You know what I mean? Like, all right, well, I'm going to have to, from a limited role standpoint, I'm going to have to do these things, or I need a right knee replacement. What is it that I can do with that knee? What positions can I work from? What positions can I not work from? Those are all, to me, like, it's a chess match, right? Like, okay, I've gotten my rook taken. I've gotten my knight taken. I still got to play chess. How do you do that? You know what I mean? Well, you've got to leverage the pieces you have that are strong, and you've got to protect the pieces that you have that are weak. And so I think getting better at jiu-jitsu, if I'm to give a white belt, one piece of advice, it's don't be afraid to fail and succeed at the things that you're good at, and mix those two together as much as possible. Use the things that you're good at naturally and work on the things that you're not good at, and your game will improve dramatically.
Wonderful advice. I appreciate that, Coach. This is one that I definitely don't know. I've had mixed answers, but I'm curious. What do you think is the mark of a great coach? Like when a young student walks into an academy, obviously most guys don't know what the fuck they're looking at. But let's say that, you were to walk into an academy with the knowledge you have now. What would be the first thing you would look at to be like, okay, I could stay with this coach. This is a great coach overall.
How do they treat the worst student in the academy? Yep. How do they treat the worst student in the academy? How do they treat the most challenging student in the academy? And how do they relate from the brand new white belt to the most advanced black belt in the room? How do they relate to those people? Their ability to it's easy to coach people who are talented. It's easy to coach people who are talented. It's not necessarily easy to get the most out of those people at times, but it's easy to coach people who are talented, and it's fun to coach people who are talented. It's not so fun to coach people who are not talented, but it is way more rewarding if you can do so. So, how do they treat the worst person in the academy? How do they work with the most challenging person in the academy? I had a conversation last night on Instagram with one of my students, and she's awesome. She probably is the bravest person in the room. And she's constantly trying things where you're like, I can't believe she tried that. And a lot of times she succeeds, and she's a little thing. She's a little tiny thing. She sent me a picture on Instagram last night, and she said, next time we have all the black belts in, we need to pose in a picture like this. And I said, I don't like the picture. And she's like, why? And I said, well, I think that the focus of the picture is on the black belts, and it looks like they're the most important people in the room, and they're not, right? The most important people in the academy are not the black belts. They are an important component of the academy, but the academy is made up of all of the students. And if you don't recognize that and you don't realize that as an instructor, it is not, Chris competitor that goes and wins all the competitions for you that builds your academy. It's the 20 other people who are the hobbyists who are just coming in to try to get better and to get a little more fit and to maybe understand a little self-defense and to challenge themselves. They're the people that build your academy. They're the people that are the anchors of your academy. How do you relate to them? That's the mark of a good coach, in my opinion, is the guys that can work from the most challenging student in the room to the most talented person in the room. How can they transition between those people seamlessly, and how do they treat them? If you see a coach that's avoiding the worst people in the room and the most challenging person in the room, it's not a good sign.
Ooh, wow. I never thought about that and all the time that I've trained, and that makes a lot of sense. I see what you're saying. That's awesome. I mean, now for those enthusiasts who might become hobbyists, that's how you look at the mark of a great coach if you decide to go to an academy. And
I think so. I think so. I think so. There's other components to that, but I think that's a really big deal, is how do you treat the most challenging or the worst students in the room?
I mean, I think that makes sense too, looking at it from the outside.
It carries over, man. It really does. Like we have some students who have some physical and emotional and mental challenges in the academy. One of them recently was promoted to blue belt, and the room went fucking nuts. Nuts, right? This guy is probably the most beloved student in the gym because everybody knows what he struggles with and what he's had to struggle with. And for him to get a blue belt was a major, major accomplishment. And because of the culture that we built in the academy went nuts. It was mayhem when he got his blue belt, right? And there were lots of other people that got promoted that day, but the academy went nuts. I was so I think it was Libório who really first impressed upon me. I went to a friend of mine's black belt promotion in Michigan, and I did a seminar, and there was 80 people at the academy for the seminar, and it was crazy busy. And they had like, little kids and babies and whatever, and they're all running around while we're doing the seminar and whatever. And so many of the adults were just shushing the kids and, be quiet and whatever. And finally, at one point, I stopped and I said, please don't do that. Don't try to quiet the kids. Don't try to put them in a corner. Let them be kids. Let them run around. Let them whatever, because the sign of a successful academy is when people trust it enough to bring their entire family and just be themselves. That's the sign of a successful academy. When you've got kids running around the academy playing, when you've got, kids playing with each other and throwing balls and playing soccer and doing things outside of just jiu-jitsu, and you got kids sitting coloring and eating and adults doing their thing and whatever else, that's a successful academy, right? Not how many people medaled at the last tournament we went to. Like, do people trust the academy as a place where they feel comfortable and where they relate and they feel like they can let their guard down? That's a successful academy, man. That is the sign of a culture that you should want to be a part of, in my opinion.
Yeah, that actually brought me back to Legends, because that's exactly what it feels like. I always tell people, because if someone has asked me before in my workplace, and they were like, when you go to the gym, what's the first thing you do? And I was like, for the first time in like all the week that I go through, I walk into the academy and my shoulders go down and I can just be human. And I don't know how to explain that any better. I can just be Danny and there's nothing else to it. I'm not like fucking super cool. I'm not a dork. I'm not anything. I'm just Danny and I'm with my people. This is my tribe and I get to be here with them, and all the shit that I'm dealing with, it's gone. I don't have to deal with it right now. Right now I get to be here with these people who I love to death. Like, these are my people. And it feels so good to be around them. And then I have my coaches who, they poke on you, they fuck with you. That's how you know your coach likes you, if he's messing with you and makes you laugh. And we just,
if your coach doesn't pay any attention to you, it's a really bad sign.
Yeah,
it's a really bad sign.
It's a serious sign.
I remember when my son was at Nebraska, he was one of the best high school players in the country. I mean, he was a top 5 at his position in the country. He was the ESPN 250, Rivals 300. I mean, he was a big deal. He had a lot of offers, a lot of whatever. And when he went to Nebraska, he was with the 3s and 4s when he first got there for about a month and a half, and then he moved to the 1s and 2s. And he got yelled at. I mean, it was just like, oh my God, are they ever not going to yell at him? And, one of the coaches said to me, he's like, it's not when they're yelling at him that you got to worry. It's when they stop yelling at them that you got to worry. And it's so true. If your coaches aren't fucking with you, if your coaches aren't giving you shit, if your coaches aren't teasing with you, if your coaches aren't pushing, prodding, nudging, seeing, where you're at, then they probably don't care very much. You know what I mean? It's, and what you said, like, it was interesting. When I left the American Top Team Academy in Central Florida here and went out and did my own thing, when I walked into the academy for the first time, my own academy, there was no weight on my shoulders. It was like a tension release on my shoulders. And it took the tension not being there for me to recognize that. But if you have that experience when you walk into Legends, that's a good sign, man. Like, if that tension release off your shoulders, the weight of the world, like, sort of gets left at the door, that's the place you should be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm grateful for that, Professor. Oh, my apologies. Wait, I'm so sorry. I'm such a, I've been on traditionalist my whole life, so I've never not said professor. And now my brain is like,
I just, like, I don't, listen, I don't deserve any more or less respect than anybody else. I feel like the guys who want to be called professor, and I try to call other people professor until I sort of have their view on it. But for me, like coach or Wade, it's just fine because I've just been doing jiu-jitsu longer than a lot of people have, right? I've got engineers, I've got doctors, I've got lawyers, I've got, a virtual cornucopia of America training at my academy. If I was to ask any of them about their respective field or expertise, I'm not going to call them professor because they know more than me, right? We just all have our field of expertise. Like, I just respect who they are and respect what they do as a person. And the professor part, I just feel like, I don't know, maybe it's a little ostentatious or a little bit like demand. I let my students cross train. any of my students can cross train at any academy they want. I don't care. I don't have any restrictions on that. I don't, if people from any academy can visit my academy, you don't have to wear my gi. You don't have to wear my rash guard. You don't have to wear any of that at my academy. As a matter of fact, I think the biggest compliment in the world is when somebody is training at your academy wearing somebody else's gear. To me, there's no better advertising. So it's like, I'm just not big on the professor or, whatever. Like, call me Wade, call me coach, whatever. But it's really about the jiu-jitsu. It's not about the titles and the names and whatever else. So I've just always sort of felt like it was unnecessarily ostentatious, I guess. Just the way I feel about it. There's people who don't feel that way, and that's okay. But I'm just not that guy.
Thank you for that. Adam said the same thing. He was like, some people, he's like, you're just going to go into an academy and you're going to, just coach. And if they say professor, you call him professor and that's it. And I always told Coach Adam, I was like, it feels weird not to call you or Mike professor at some point. It's just, again, I guess it was like engineered in the beginning when I first started training. I have to say, I won't mention the gym. I was in Florida. I lived in Orlando for like 3 years. I was training at an academy, and the head coach was great, but the owner, I guess you would claim it. I guess he was the owner / head professor because he was like 4th or 5th degree black belt. He would come in, and one time I said, "Hey, coach, when I've never seen you, on the mats. I know you're a legend and everything, but like, would you ever teach a session or seminar?" And he had this look on his face that scared the shit out of me. I was like, "Oh shit, I shouldn't have talked to him." And he said, "I am professor." And then after that, I was like, okay, I'm never going to cross that line again. So it left that imprint on me. And then my coach was like, okay, from now on, just say professor, okay? I was like, you got it, coach. I appreciate that. My coach, everyday coach, he was a black belt, and he was the nicest human being. I loved him. But when this guy came around, the energy and the vibe of him scared the shit out of me, and it would make me like nervous. I was like, I don't think he likes me, and I don't know why. I haven't done anything.
What city was
in
this
Orlando?
In? I'll bet you if we talked offline, I could tell you who that is.
I think you figured it out already just based on like the reaction. Because he scares his own students. Some of his brown belts are even like they get a little. We all get like our shoulders tensed. And I was like, X, because I have a teammate named Xavier. I was like, X, when you went to ADCC and you got the medal, did he even say congratulations? He was like, no, I don't think he said a word to me the entire week. I was like, whoa, that's intimidating, dude. I don't know if I can do that. That's part of what made me kind of fall out of love with jiu-jitsu. It was like, man, I don't know if I want to do that. And then I had we have a local black belt in the city that I'm from. I'm from Yonkers. And I trained with a guy when he was a blue belt. And now he's a black belt and phenomenal jiu-jitsu player. Like, I can't even give him any shit for that. But I recently ran into him, and when we went to shake hand, he kind of did like the hey, and like kind of looked over my shoulders, and that left an impression on me for a long time. It actually pissed me off to the point that I was like, I know he's a black belt, but if I catch him in the street, I might knock his ass off. So I've been trying to like not get to that point because I'm like, I shouldn't be a dick about it. The guy's a good coach. He's running a great academy. I'm proud of him. But there was a part of me that was like, dude, I used to sing your praises. I used to think you were like out of this world, great jiu-jitsu player. But now that black belt's not going to give you a chin. It's not going to magically give you a chin that you didn't have when we used to spar. So I don't know if you need to know this one, but now that I'm at that age where I'm like, the professor line is like, it feels like a very thin line in the sand, and you kind of almost don't know when to not step over or when to step away from it. Like, oh shit, I don't know. And I don't want people to feel offended. So I've done the professor every time just to be formal. Cause I want to avoid it altogether after that interaction. Yeah. And now I'm like,
I think it's something that over a period of time has sort of been like ingrained in a lot of the academies and whatever. And, honest to God, man, like there's a lot of professors in jiu-jitsu who are not worthy of the fucking respect they get. They're pieces of shit human beings. And, listen, everybody makes mistakes in their lives. It's how you recover from the mistakes. It's what you do about them. Do you fix the pattern and behavior that you have done and become a better human being? I don't knock people for their mistakes. I knock people for how they respond to their mistakes. And I knock people for how they face adversity or I guess knock wouldn't be right. I acknowledge people for how they face adversity and what they do when they're faced with adversity, because man, when life is easy, right? That's not what defines who you are. What defines who you are is how do you work through things when they're tough, right? The kid that competed at Zapatero last night, he, like I said, man, he got his purple belt in 2 years. Like trust me, man, like he's not far from the next level. It's going to be a while before he gets promoted, but like but you know something, he's at 3 practices a day, 6 days a week, right? So he's compressed 10 years of jiu-jitsu into 2 years, and he came in as a judo black belt. But man, let me tell you something. There have been days that I have put that kid, I mean, we literally, like, some days at day class, there'll be a couple of us that'll show up and we'll pair up and we'll just roll. I rolled with him for 40 minutes straight, 39 of it just punishing him. That kid has never even thought about quitting. Not once. Not once. Not once. He does not. He just doesn't have it in him, right? And to me, when I see that in somebody and I see like how they respond to adversity, and not only that, after 39 minutes of just like literally like being cranked on, torqued on, smashed, compressed, can't breathe, face is purple, ears are, like purple and blue. I mean, the guy gets up and goes, man, that was awesome. It's like, what do you do with that guy? You're in the long run, you're not going to beat that guy. You're just not going to beat that guy in the long run. You know what I mean? Versus the guy who goes, oh man, I don't ever want to do that again, And it really comes down to, I think there's 2 types of people in the world. And it's one of my favorite sayings. I've actually thought about putting this on a shirt. There's people in the world that say, fuck this, and there's people in the world that say, fuck that. That's the only 2 kind of people there are in the world, right? There's a person who comes in and they get their ass kicked and they get their ass beat and whatever, and they go, fuck this, I'm never doing this again. It exposed me as a human being. It exposed me for everything that I am at my basic core, and I never want to show that again. And then there's the fuck that people that say, fuck that, I'm never letting that happen to me again. I'm going to fix this. I'm going to become a better human being. I'm going to become a better person. And I'm going to fix where nobody is going to do that shit to me ever again in my life. That's the only 2 people there are in the world. The fuck this and fuck that people. Be the latter. And if you're not the latter, then I don't know what to tell you, man, because you're gonna have I think there's some very rough times coming to us here in the United States. I think we're gonna have some really challenging components from not just the food supply, but a power supply, our economy. I mean, you look at what's happening with BRICS and all the stuff all over the country, you're going to find out who the fuck this and fuck that people real quick. You know what I mean? And I had a guy telling me one time we were renting some space in a CrossFit academy. And he's telling me what a great salesperson he was. And he's going to add 200 people to my, gym and whatever else. And I'm like, man, they're not the same people. The CrossFit people and the jiu-jitsu people are not the same people. And I kept trying to tell him this, and he just was not having any success in getting people to do jiu-jitsu. So finally, one day we were standing there, and there was like a balcony overlooking down, into the CrossFit area. And he's like, I don't understand why I can't get people signed up. And I was like, listen, man, if there was an apocalypse, the jiu-jitsu people would eat the CrossFit people. They're not the same crowd, man. They're not the same crowd. And so, it's in a lot of ways, man, it's really how do people respond to adversity, and who are they when things go bad, and how do they respond to the mistakes that they make in their life? That's what defines a person. And that's what jiu-jitsu is about. Because I don't care how good of a roll you had, you still made a mistake. And when you made that mistake, how did you respond to it? How do you fix that?
Yeah, essentially it is what it is. That's what I think. Every time I've rolled, I've gotten destroyed, mauled by these guys, and then I'm like sitting there smiling, and you'd be like, but he lost. And I'd be like, yeah, but you don't understand. I just learned something. I know now I can't fucking put my arm there. But if I do put my arm there, I might be able to bait him into something that I have, I could try it. I could fuck it up and like completely be wrong and be a dumbass. But next time I roll with that guy, I'm going to try that shit. Maybe he breaks my arm. Maybe I get out of it and put him in a really shitty position. We'll see how it goes, on to the final roll. But this is my last question for you. And thank you so much for so much of your time. I greatly appreciate you.
Sure.
So Wade, with this in mind, all that you've accomplished, all that you continue to do, When it's all said and done and you've rolled your final roll, it's over. That's the end of it. What would you like your legacy to be?
Wow, great question. It's funny. Like I said, I'm approaching 60, and so like you start to think about things like that. Like I never 20 years ago, I never understood that. People would talk about legacy. People would talk about like how do you want to be remembered, whatever. And I always thought that that's a really abstract concept. You know what I mean? But now, like by law of averages, I might have 20 years left in my life, right? Maybe less. So, what's the average, life expectancy of a male these days? 76, 75, 74?
Usually about 75. Yeah.
Oh, what's that?
About 75, or for the average males between 75 and 80, but they rounded about 75.
So, at that case, I have 20 years left in my life. So like those things start to sort of become considerations. I think the legacy I would like to leave is that I gave a shit and look at all the compassionate monsters that you produce, right? Like that would be cool. Like to have a bunch of like anybody can breed a killer if you get enough killers walking through the door. Not many people can breed compassionate killers. And I think that's probably the legacy I would like to leave. I'd like to leave like a legacy of compassionate killers, people that can relate to the worst and most challenging student in the room, but also handle the best person in the room. That would be, somebody that can scale that up and down as needs to be. That probably would be. I'd like to leave a bunch of compassionate, talented killers so that in 50 years or 100 years, that lineage is going to track down and going to be like, man, Wade produced a lot of really good guys, And I didn't produce them. I just helped to produce them because, honest to God, if you don't do the work, I can't do it for you. You know what I mean? So I'm not really producing them. I guess it'd be more like I helped to produce a bunch of compassionate killers and left a good legacy of talent that hopefully just continues to span out. I'd love to see all of my black belts ultimately have their own academies and be successful and whatever. And some of them will, some of them won't. But it would be cool to have that sort of legacy to, somebody who gave a shit and somebody who produced a bunch of compassionate killers. Because it's not being a killer isn't the end all. It's can you turn it on? Can you turn it off? Can you be that person when you need to be and not be that person when you don't need to be? And it's, I guess that would be it. That's a really good question, man. I'm probably going to think about that for a while.
I appreciate it, Wade. Yeah, I think it was recently said on Instagram, there was a woman that said her favorite thing about her husband is that he is a BJJ black belt, and they asked her why, and she said, it's not that he can beat people up. That's not the important part. It's the fact that when my husband walks onto a mat, yeah, he's that guy and he can take care of everything, but when he walks off the mat, he's the kindest human being. He will help anyone with anything. He will take the shirt off his back because he's been humbled so many times on that mat. He's gotten his ass kicked so many times on that mat that he knows what that feeling is, and he can be empathetic and take apathy and push it far away from himself and go, hey, I know what that feels like. Take a deep breath. It's going to get better. But at the same time, that's still a bad motherfucker. So she's like, that's what I fell for. That attribute that he has. She's like, I don't know if it's all black belts, but most black belts that I've met have that same attribute. They're all a bunch of fucking killers. They could definitely kick your ass. They're not going to. They're going to be polite to you. They're going to talk to you with civility. They're going to treat you like a human being. And that humanity is not seen in a lot of other sports. And I hate to say that because I grew up in boxing and that's not the truth at all. And then we had wrestlers in my family and they were tough, but they were also very kind. But they were just tough. They wanted to be tougher. Who's tougher than who? And then with jiu-jitsu, we see that everybody kind of just comes through this funnel. And the funnel is that everybody starts off as a white belt, but not everybody makes it to black. You see everybody kind of fall off in between for that reason because the black belt is that person. Is that person that went through all of it. It's a white belt that just never quit. He just kept showing up. He kept coming to class, kept doing the thing, and then evolving over time. and being okay with sucking at shit sometimes, and then just being like, all right, cool, whatever. Like, we can make this work. I don't have to quit. I can just improve and get better over time. And then when they get to the top, unlike most people, they're not pompous. They're just like, yeah, but like, there's still more shit to learn. Like, I can still continue to learn more shit. And we're seeing that more and more now. Thank God, the culture has changed, and we do feel a lot better now about the culture. But I think you have produced, at least I know one that you produced. I talk to the guy every day, and I love him like my big brother. I hope that I can at least come close to getting to his level and being kind of like him in some ways, because he's the coolest person I've ever met. Even I'm starstruck sometimes. I've watched his matches, and then when I see him in person, I'm like, that's the real Adam Colorado. Like, holy shit, this is cool. And then I'll look over here and there's Coach Mike, and I'm like, Mike Davila's on the fucking mat. Like, what am I supposed to do right now? And I feel like it's the coolest thing now to be the white belt who sits in the middle of the room and watches these two black belts interact with their students and gets to be one of their students. So I think you've already produced one extremely awesome killer who's compassionate and kind. So you've done it at least once now. So we know you've successfully done that. But at the end of our show,
my son is immensely talented. Other than the one black belt, which we didn't talk about name wise, but other than that, I'm extremely proud of the other black belts I produced, and they're all like good people. They're good people, and they're talented, and they have their individual section. And I tell you, man, I take it very seriously. I will not promote somebody that I don't think fits the criteria. I've made that mistake, and you learn from your mistakes, man. That's the key. If you make a mistake, you learn from it, and I am dotting my I's and crossing my T's and double checking every single person and learning about them as a person. And I think, like I said, one of the ways you do that is by rolling with them. You learn a lot about somebody when you roll them. You know what I mean? You learn about the person that quits easily. You learn about the person that doesn't quit. You learn about the person that can overcome adversity. You learn about the person that, has the ability to regroup. Like when shit's going downhill, can you reverse it? Because that's one of the hardest things in the world to do, is to reverse when you're going downhill. You get in a match and you get submitted, and you got 4 minutes left in the match. Can you rebound from that in your match? Can you bring that back around? Can you forget and flush? Watching, one of the funniest things that I think I learned a lot from college football, watching defensive backs and receivers go against each other, knowing that no matter how good that defensive back is, a good receiver or a great receiver is going to catch a ball on him. You got to be able to just be like, well, you're lucky you caught that one because you're not getting the next one. You got to flush it, and you got to go right back and line up against the guy again, And like I watched that in practice, and watched, like the best defensive backs get beat, and they're right back on the line the next time. Like, bitch, you got lucky you caught that ball because you're not catching the next one. You have to be that way in jiu-jitsu. All right, man, you got that, but you're not getting that again. I see where you're coming from. You're not going to pull that again. It's me. You learn about a lot about people from that standpoint. So, yeah, man, yeah, it's Adam is fantastic, and I've got a lot of fantastic black belts at our academy, and we've got more coming. And I think that this sport is just growing. So, it's so much fun to watch the growth and the maturity and the technical level. Watching Zapatero last night was like, man, this is a world-class show on a local level. Like, that is so cool, because that didn't exist 20 years ago. That was not, you go to a tournament and there's 3 really good guys, and those guys are going to hash it out with each other. And now, man, there's new names all the time. I watched Max Hansen last night. He's kind of like the underground king. You guys won everything other than the big events. And watching him compete last night was like, man, this guy is so talented. Like, it's like he's next. He's the next big name. You know what I mean? Like watching the Corbe brothers last night, Gavin and DeAndre. Mm-hmm. Man, they're both from Standard Jiu Jitsu. Both those guys and they compete against each other last night.
Whoa.
First time ever, supposedly. That's what DeAndre said. I think it's DeAndre. If I didn't get their name, last name was definitely Corbe, but it's Gavin and I think DeAndre. But man, they competed against each other last night. Like that, that's cool. That's cool to watch. And Josh is smart. Josh won't let 2 people from the same academy be on opposite brackets. He makes them be in the same bracket, so they got to resolve it before the finals. So watching that last night was great. And it was DeAndre and Max Hansen last night in the finals. Man, both guys are immensely talented. Just watching that happen is so much fun.
Yeah, the Corbett brothers are coming up. I actually follow one on Instagram, and Greg loves that kid. He's like, that kid is just, he's built different. He got on the Morpheus app. He found every single inch where he could get better and went for it. So I think with him and Max Hansen, we're looking at jiu-jitsu with the bright eyes, bright-eyed and happy, because we know, holy shit, it's only going to get better as we progress through all these times. We're at the end of the show. Wade, I want to thank you for your time. Thank you so much for giving me all this time. I really do greatly appreciate it. And just so that the people at home know what's coming up next, and I'm going to put your socials in the description, but do you have anything you want to tell the fans at home? Do you have anything that you want to put out there so that they know what's coming?
Got a new academy opening in April or May in Melbourne, Florida. Other than that, man, go train. Go make yourself a better person. Go find something that challenges you and be a better person tomorrow than you are today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Coach. Everybody, this is Wade Rome. Thank you so much for your curiosity. Thank you for your time. And thank you for joining us in the goddamn room. Coach, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, man. Appreciate your time.